Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this chilly afternoon for the next edition of our E-rate training. Today, we are talking about the E-rate Form 470 for funding year 2026. Now, I do want to point out, because these slides are kind of a lot. There's over 130 slides with this presentation. However, we're not going to go over every single example for service requests on the Form 470 that are actually included in the slides. These slides are meant for later reference so that you can jump to whatever part of the form you're working on and find an example that best matches what you're doing. So today we're going to, of course, talk about the general navigation. We'll do a monthly internet example. We'll do a bookmobile hotspot example, and definitely internal connections. If we've got time, we might do managed services, but we are going to skip a couple of things. Do note that the service requests are color-coded so that all of the slides that, for example, give you the steps to make an internal connections request are red. The bookmobile hotspot service requests are in purple. Just on and on to help you stay in the right place on the form. Okay, just a quick disclaimer. I do not work for the Federal Communications Commission, and I do not work for the Universal Service Administrative Company. So official guidance comes only from the FCC and USAC. I'm going to do my very best to give you up-to-date, accurate information, but things can change after this recording. And if USAC or the FCC tell you something different, go by what they say, please. So let's get ourselves oriented regarding dates. So we do have an E-rate funding years chart for 2025, 2026, and 2027. So right now we're talking about, in yellow, funding year 2026. So mostly when we're talking about 2026, we're going to be thinking about the recurring service dates. So that would be things like your monthly internet access or monthly managed services for your equipment. The time period for the funding year covers July 1st, 2026 to June 30th, 2027. For category 2, we have early installation starting as soon as April 1st, 2026, and late installation going through September 30th of 2027. Looking at the application process, we are still waiting on some dates to be announced. I expect that next Thursday, a news brief is going to be emailed to all applicants that will tell you the exact deadline, or the start and end dates, I should say, for the Form 471 filing window. And the deadline for the Form 471 is what sets the deadline for the Form 470. So just writing this out a little bit differently so it's easier to see. I project that the deadline to file the Form 470 is going to be February 26th. However, you're going to need to look in next week's news brief to get that final date. Now is a great time to be making profile updates. So, for example, if a branch has moved, has a new phone number, if the square footage has changed, you want to go into the E-rate Productivity Center, open the profile for the relevant branch, and make those changes. We don't have the exact date for this yet, but I think you'll have until roughly January 12th to make changes to the profile yourself. Once the profiles are locked for the filing window, you will not be able to make those edits yourself. You'll have to file your application form and then put in a modification request with the application reviewer. Also, keep in mind whether or not you are opening or closing branches during funding year 2026. So if you've got a brand new location, you'll need to obtain an entity number to designate that location as a recipient of service. Also, if you have branches that are permanently closed, we can also take care of that during the administrative window, but you need to make sure that before you do that, absolutely all invoicing for that particular location is complete. All right, let's quickly run through the eligible services list. So the eligible services list can be downloaded from the USAC website. It's still currently the draft version for funding year 2026, but there aren't any expectations that it will change significantly in the finalized version. The eligible services list is separated into two broad categories. Category 1 involves getting connectivity to your building or the bookmobile. Category 2 is about getting connectivity to the devices on your network, whether they're wired on the network or you're accessing Wi-Fi. So under category 1, again, the time period we're concerned about is services for July 1st, 2026 to June 30th, 2027. So basically, any method of getting on the internet is E-rate eligible. It's all about making the choice for what is most cost effective to get your library the connectivity that it needs. So mostly at this point, we've got fiber connections or maybe cable, a couple of DSL connections. You could do satellite potentially. The monthly internet service fees also would include fees for static IP addresses. Those are eligible. And if you have something like a cable modem provided by your internet service provider, that would also be eligible. You can do leased data lines, cellular data or hotspot service for the bookmobile only. Remember that for funding year 2026, hotspot lending for library patrons has been eliminated from the eligible services list. The FCC voted to remove those discounts on September 30th. We don't really do these, but you can also get discounts on a self-provision network that is owned or operated by the library, and also modulating electronics to light fiber. Category 2 is separated into 3 service types. So first up is internal connections. This is where the bulk of the Category 2 requests are made. So that includes cabling and various pieces of equipment and licenses that you need to make your Wi-Fi work and to make sure that your network is protected and functioning well. So major requests typically include switches, routers, access points, and firewalls. Do note that some pieces of equipment may not be fully E-rate eligible. That same is true for some of the licenses. E-rate is about, or is concerned with, providing basic conduit access to the internet. Remember that this program was created by the Telecommunications Act of 1996, when the internet was really, really different. So advanced security features are not E-rate eligible. So that's why a lot of times the licenses or even the hardware for firewalls may only be partially eligible. Because useful features like content filtering, anti-malware, anti-intrusion, and antivirus are actually not E-rate eligible. Other pieces of equipment may be partially eligible based on what equipment will be supported. So that's true of UPS battery backups and racks. So if they're supporting E-rate eligible equipment, then the UPS or the rack will be fully eligible. But if they're also supporting some ineligible equipment like a server or computers, those items may be partially eligible or not eligible at all. Next up for category 2, the service type, basic maintenance of internal connections. So this would be for repair and upkeep, software upgrades and patches, basic technical support for your pieces of eligible internal connections. So mostly we see this come up with maintenance and technical support subscriptions provided by a manufacturer. So for example, a lot of times if you have a firewall, you need an accompanying basic maintenance subscription in order to get those firewall updates for new antivirus definitions and things like that. It is possible to get discounts on a contract where you have a vendor that is coming every month to maintain your equipment, or they come and fix something if it breaks and bill you for so many hours. We tend to have lower success on the invoicing side with those, but it is possible. A growing area for Category 2 for Kentucky libraries is managed internal broadband services. So that is where you've got a vendor that is handling the monitoring and daily operation of your networking equipment. So a lot of times you'll see this service called managed Wi-Fi or managed firewall. So some internet service providers now offer this service. It can be a good option if your library doesn't have dedicated IT staff. So this could, take some of that burden off of you. So if you're interested in that, obviously, let me know. We're glad to review a list of what you've got, because you can get this service for management of equipment that you already own. Or you can ask for a vendor to lease the equipment to you. And in that situation, that vendor is responsible for making sure all the licensing is up to date. So it really belongs to the vendor, and you're just paying that lease fee, which is great. There are also some miscellaneous charges, so some taxes and other surcharges are eligible. Also, again, you can rent or lease equipment. Shipping to get especially Category 2 items to your building, training for new equipment that was purchased with Category 2 funds, and of course installation and initial configuration of the services. It is important to note for E-rate that you can't get discounts for any equipment or services that are considered backup, redundancy, or failover. This is all about supporting your primary internet connection. So there are some situations where, say you have two internet connections, but they serve different populations. Like one internet connection is for the staff and the other is for the public. You might be able to get both of those approved. But if you've got a connection that's just there for backup purposes, or if it's a piece of networking equipment that you want to buy just in case your main equipment goes down, you would have to pay out of pocket for those services. They would not be E-rate eligible. Also, just a reminder, at this point, pretty much every library in Kentucky that files for E-rate is SIPA compliant. So the Children's Internet Protection Act requires participants in the E-rate program who are getting discounts on internet access or anything under Category 2 to be compliant with SIPA. So that involves having a filter installed to block certain visual images that are considered obscene, child pornography, or material that is harmful to minors, which is sexual material. You also need an internet safety policy, and you need to have a public hearing about that internet safety policy when it goes into effect. At this point, some libraries have been compliant since 2002 or 2003. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that if you have lost track of documentation showing that your library held the public hearing for your internet safety policy, you should hold that hearing again. It can be held during a monthly board meeting. I'm glad to assist you with that, or you can watch an archive training. All right, just a quick overview of competitive bidding. So for competitive bidding, you have to file the Form 470. So this is a standardized form where your library is notifying E-rate participating vendors about all of the E-rate eligible services that your library needs in the upcoming year. When you file the form, you have to continue accepting bids for those services for at least 28 calendar days. That is honestly, I think, the most important rule that you need to keep in mind with E-rate, because if you jump the gun and you decide too soon, you sign a contract too soon, then you have violated competitive bidding and you're not getting funded. So this is the one thing you really have to be very careful about. Fortunately, when you file a Form 470, the system will email you after those minimum 28 calendar days have elapsed. So as long as you haven't specified a later due date, that's your cue that if you've received all the bids you want to consider, you can go ahead and evaluate your bids. Also, filing a Form 470 is not an obligation to move forward with a contract or purchases. So if your library goes out to bid and you don't like the responses that come back, you don't have to sign that contract. You can just say, okay, I was checking the prices, but I didn't like it. You're not obligated to actually spend funds, and you're also not obligated to file E-rate just because you won through competitive bidding. The bidding process has to be open and fair to all participating vendors. So that means that you're not giving any secret extra information to, say, a provider you've worked with in the past that you're not telling the other vendors about. We need all of the information that the vendors need stated on the Form 470 or in an RFP document you use with the Form 470. And fair just means that all vendors are treated the same. Also, we are not price matching at Walmart. We are not haggling. So it's very important that you never tell another vendor that, hey, vendor A is also in this bidding process. Can you beat this price from this vendor? You're not allowed to tell vendors about other vendors who are trying to submit bids, and you're definitely not allowed to share that pricing. So this is about just giving everybody the information in one go and let the chips fall where they may. When you're considering which bid to take, you have to consider the E-rate eligible cost as the primary factor in the bid evaluation. That means that the most points or the highest weight is assigned to E-rate eligible cost. You can certainly consider other factors. For example, if you're bidding for a lot of Category 2 equipment and you know some of the equipment is not fully E-rate eligible, you can consider the ineligible cost at a lower factor. You may also consider things like the quality of their technical solution. You ask for certain specifications, does their bid meet that? You can consider the level of experience the vendor has with your library and maybe similar customers. So you may give more points to a vendor that you've worked with on E-rate in the past and you know they can do the job, versus some vendor you've never heard of, who's never worked with a Kentucky library. You may give them lower points. It just kind of depends. On the Form 470, we are trying to anticipate what you are going to have on the Form 471 application. So on the Form 470, you are making service requests. You're saying these are the services I need. And whatever you're going to list on the application form, the 471, you need to make sure that the Form 470, covers that service type and that function. So this next slide has some examples. And yes, I do love using a lot of color. So on the left, if you're thinking about on the Form 471, you want to file for discounts on internet, then on the right on the Form 470, you need a service request for internet access and data transmission services. If you want to get discounts on a bookmobile hotspot, then on the Form 470, you need to have a service request for cellular data plan / air card service. Or you need to have the correct function for a piece of equipment. You can't get discounts on a firewall on the Form 471 if you didn't have the function for firewall on the Form 470. This also involves listing location. So if you go out to bid and say, here's the address I want the services to go to, you can't then turn around and add another address or another library branch as a recipient of service if they weren't listed on the Form 470 or your RFPs. So it really needs to encompass, everything that you're going to have on that Form 471. We do have some situations where we can skip competitive bidding. So for category 1, there's an exemption called CABIO, the commercially available business class internet option. So this only covers the primary connection for a location. So if you've got a branch that has 2 connections, maybe one for the public and one for staff, you're going to need to go through competitive bidding for both of those connections. But we do have a number of branches now that meet this exemption. So it's got to be pretty fast. It needs to be at least 100 megs download and at least 10 megs upload for the speed. The cost for the service must be at or below $3,600 each year for each branch, and that would include any installation costs or other eligible fees like your static IP addresses. And the service and price have to be commercially available to other business or government customers. This is not just a special deal they're only cutting for you. Similarly, we also have a category 2 bidding exemption. It does not have a neat nickname. So you can skip competitive bidding for category 2 if for any single eligible location you're requesting $3,600 or less, or you're requesting discounts on $3,600 or less pre-discount for that one location in that 1 year. So the purchases still have to be cost effective. So, when you're looking at your options, if something is way over the manufacturer's suggested retail price or seems just way out of line, you're probably going to get a question about that and have to justify why you're doing something that's so crazy expensive. And this can cover any combination of the service types under category 2. So you could have a mix of internal connections, basic maintenance, and or managed internal broadband services. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that this exemption is only for libraries, and where vendors are more used to dealing with schools because there's so many more school applicants, a lot of them are confused by this concept, and they also don't know what to do when they don't have a Form 470 number to reference. So while this bidding exemption, is there, and I think it's a good option if we're getting near the end of the application filing window and you don't have time to do the full 28 calendar day bidding process, I would say if it's far enough in advance, you probably just want to file a Form 470 anyway, because that's going to get the attention of vendors that do E-rate. That's going to give them the Form 470 number to reference. And if the services come back a little more expensive than you thought, you're covered by your bidding process. So in general, this exemption, okay, noted, but maybe not as useful as one would hope. If they ever expand it to schools, I think it would become a lot more useful because vendors would definitely be incentivized to think about this exemption. Okay, let's talk contracts briefly. So if you've got services that are under a contract that's been approved through a previous E-rate bidding cycle, you need to double check to make sure that contract is going to cover you through the end of the funding year. So does the contract at least go to June 30th, 2027? If it's set to expire before that, then you're definitely going to need to, go out to bid in order to continue receiving those services. So I posted on the listserv yesterday a message that linked to the Form 470 statuses document. So it shows the Forms 470 that have already been filed, but there's also a notes column where I have tried to let people know what they definitely need to bid for. Generally, everybody's bidding for bookmobile hotspot service because that's rarely under contract. But also, I try to keep track of the contract expiration. So I've made notes about that in case you're not sure. Of course, your humble state E-rate coordinator is not perfect. So I highly recommend that you double check what I wrote. Look at your contracts, look at last year's filing. Make sure that I haven't inadvertently skipped something. Let's see. When in doubt, file a Form 470 to go through bidding, of course. Also, you may want to keep in mind your library's procurement policies or procedures. So some of you are library directors and you have pretty broad latitude to go through the bidding process, pick the vendor, and go ahead and sign the contract as long as it's something that's generally covered in the budget, like your monthly recurring internet. Other times, even if you're the director or you're another staff member, you may need to be going to the library board to present, here's the bid evaluation, here's who we think we should go with, and get a board resolution to go forward with that contract. So if you're a library that needs to get board approval, you really want to think about dates. So I project that the application deadline is going to be March 26th. Again, we're going to find out that exact date next week. So if you need the board to look over something before you can execute that contract, you want to plan far enough ahead to have your bidding process done so that at the relevant board meeting, you're good to go. So at minimum, you're going to want to start your bidding process about 5 weeks before, your last board meeting. But again, sooner is better. I highly recommend that Kentucky libraries file their Forms 470 by the end of January, if possible. Now, if you're in a situation where maybe you haven't done E-rate before, or you haven't done E-rate for a particular service and you have an existing contract, there is a possibility of getting discounts on that contract with some provisos. You have to go through the bidding process, and you would consider the existing contract as one of the bids. And if the contract honestly wins the bid evaluation and it is the best choice, then you would award that contract, and you would assign it a new contract award date for E-rate purposes. So you're kind of memorializing that contract to say, on January 28th, 2026, this contract won the E-rate bid evaluation, because that's what you're going to report to USAC, for E-rate purposes. However, this is not a great way to do E-rate. It is not the golden path to E-rate success. So the best thing to do is, when you need a service, file a Form 470, evaluate the bids, and then sign a new contract. That way there's no confusion about dates. But if you're in this situation, let me know, and I can help you make sure that you've covered all your bases so you can get discounts on that contract. In the bidding process, you may want to keep in mind what the likely amount of the contract will be. Most Kentucky libraries have adopted the Kentucky Model Procurement Code for local governments. This came out in 1978, so a lot of you have adopted that in the 80s or the 90s. So if you're a model procurement library, you're required to go through a sealed bidding process if you're seeking a contract for over $40,000. So for example, if you've got a big $60,000 network upgrade project, you would release an RFP, provide all the information, and announce that at this particular date, time, and location, that is when the sealed bids would be open. So for most libraries, that means they're going to accept paper copies of the bid in sealed envelopes. They're going to hold on to them and not open them until the announced public bid opening. That sounds intimidating if you've never done it, but we've had lots of libraries do this with great success. Fortunately, we're kind of getting to the point where not as many libraries need to do that. For a lot of you, even gigabit internet has fallen below $40,000. And, not too many libraries do over $40,000 on their network upgrades. But that's just something to keep in mind. If you were not a model procurement library, you still need to keep the 40 grand amount in mind because you are governed by a different part of the Kentucky revised statutes. So KRS 424.260 requires you to do that sealed bidding for contracts over $40,000, and you must advertise that bid in a local newspaper. So that's a little bit of extra work, but again, we have libraries that have done this successfully. On the Form 470, there's a section for state or local procurement information. So here's some boilerplate that you can copy paste into that section of the form, whether you're a model procurement library or not. Okay, so I think this is the point where I'm going to switch over to doing a screen share. So let me get that started. It'll take a few seconds to get that rolling. Okay. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my applicant landing page. Hopefully everybody can see that now. So what I'm in right now is a special test version of the E-Rate Productivity Center. It mirrors what you see in the live system. And so we're going to be filing as Pioneer County Public Library. Now, before I do any filing of Forms 470, I may want to go and check my profile information. So this library is a multi-branch system. So there is an entity number that designates the overall library system, and that's the number that appears on all the forms. There are also individual entity numbers to designate the branches. There's a main branch, a bookmobile, and then another branch library. So I may want to kind of double check on address information or square footage. So under the My Entities section of the landing page, I can right click on the name of a particular branch, open it in a new tab. Just take a second to load. And let me make this bigger so you can see it more easily. So this opens on the summary tab of the profile. So if I see some information that is not accurate, maybe the square footage is going to change. Toward the upper right, there's a button for Manage Organization. That will open the fields to be edited. And then, for example, I could go down to the very bottom and maybe I need to change the square footage to maybe 20,000. Maybe I've done, an expansion on that building. After I make changes to the profile, then I'm going to go down to the bottom, hit Submit. Oh, I have to select a county. Okay, this is kind of difficult because this is not a real county. Obviously, there's no Pioneer County, Kentucky, so hopefully it's still going to let me go through with this, so I apologize. Okay, so nickname. They keep a log of all the changes you make on the profile, so I'm going to say updated square footage. If you update the square footage on the profile, expect that when you're going through application review for category 2, you'll be asked for documentation. So you're going to want to have a letter from the architect stating what the new square footage of the building would be, or maybe we want pictures of blueprints. You know, there's a code box usually on the first page of blueprints that indicate the interior square footage. So we'll go ahead and submit. So again, you may want to do that for each of your branches. I'm just going to go ahead and close this tab. Then back on the landing page, usually I have people start the Form 470 from this handy link at the top of the page. However, at the time this webinar is being recorded, there's a little technical issue with the live system for the E-Rate Productivity Center. Right now, all of these links toward the upper right in live system are giving people error messages. Now, it works just fine in this system because it's the test system. But if you're filing your Form 470 soon and you see an error message when you click on FCC Form 470, worry not, there is another way to start a Form 470. So I'll just quickly show you where that is. You go into the overall library system profile. You click on that directly below the USAC logo. And then you open on the summary tab of the record. In the same row, go all the way to the right and click on related actions. On the related actions list, you have a link to create FCC Form 470. So that's always an option to use. That definitely works. That's the workaround that USAC is telling people right now. But since hopefully this error message is going to be a short-lived situation, I'm just going to go ahead from the landing page, show you to start the form. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a nickname, maybe funding year 2026 to 27. Cat 1 and 2. It doesn't matter what you put as your nickname, but some people like to have a sort of schema for how they name things. That way it's consistent from funding year to funding year. Do note that the profile information for the library system is automatically populated. So if this information isn't right, the only way to fix it is to go to the profile and make the change. So again, looking right now is great because we're going to only have until sometime in mid-January to easily make those changes. If you have to file the Form 470 and the information in the system is inaccurate, you're going to need to make sure to have notes in the narrative to tell vendors what the correct address situation is. The second page of the form just has information about your library system pulled from the profiles. So it shows the number of branches you have in the system, the types of branches, so public library, bookmobile, main branch, public library system. And then it shows the system build entity. The page after that, you're going to answer, hopefully, yes, you are the main contact person. If you say no, you'll have to search for another staff member who has an account for the E-Rate Productivity Center. Most of you, though, would be saying yes. And then you have to click on which category of service or services that you want to include on the form. On the Form 470, you can actually include both services. There'll be separate pages for Category 1 requests and another page for the Category 2 requests. Now, if you are requesting, you may use an RFP document just to have more space to elaborate on your request, to give some formatting like bullet points or bolding to make it easier for your vendor to see. One situation where you have to use an RFP document is when you're requesting cellular data for the bookmobile, and that is due to a silly technical mistake somebody made in setting up the portal in 2015 and 16. And so it's not really part of the program rules, but you've got to do it. So in this case, I am going to demonstrate how to do the bookmobile request. So I'm going to go ahead and upload a document. So let me see here. I have a template for bookmobile hotspot service. I'll go ahead and upload that. So you can upload multiple files depending on the different service requests that you have. And make sure if you do have any kind of documents, whether it's a Word document with descriptions, if you have Excel files for pricing sheets, any kind of paperwork that's part of your bidding process has to be uploaded in the portal. And if you have vendor questions that come in, you'll create an addendum where you answer those questions, and you can come back to your 470 after it's already been certified and add an RFP document if needed. This next page, you check boxes if the RFP document applies to all of the service requests for a particular category. So on the left, if it applies to all Cat 1, on the right, if it applies to all Cat 2. That's a really helpful feature if you've got a big list of Category 2 networking equipment and you're going to have a bunch of service requests. But for the most part, it doesn't save you all that much time. So we start off on the service request page for Category 1. We're going to do 2 examples. So we'll do internet for buildings, or for a building, and then we'll do the bookmobile hotspot. So to get started, you click on the blue Add New Service Request button. You'll have 3 sets of iSeek bid statements. When you're requesting internet for a building, you're going to select the first statement in each set. I seek bids for internet access and or data transmission service. Then this longer version of the sentence, which lists a number of ways you can get on the internet. First again, and then first statement in the last set. So after that, the system comes up with the correct service type and function, which is internet access and data transmission services. Going down the left for the quantity, this is the number of circuits going to a particular building. Sometimes if you've got multiple branches that have the same type of service, you might be able to do, quantity 2 lines for 2 entities as an example. In this case, I'm just going to do 1 line for 1 entity. I want to say yes on installation activation. For the minimum capacity, you want to put at least the speed that your library has now. So in this case, we're going to say that the main branch currently has 100 meg. And then we are seeking bids to upgrade that as high as 1 gigabit per second, 1 Gbps. So again, you're making with this service request a scope for your request. You want to make sure that the capacities encompass whatever you might list as a service on the Form 471. So if I list the capacities as 100 megabits per second to 1 gigabit per second, I can't go to the application form and request discounts on 2 gigabit per second internet because that's outside the scope of the request. So it's better to be more expansive. If you're not certain, put higher amounts because you want to just make sure that whatever you're going to actually have your contract for or whatever you're currently being invoiced for falls within these capacities. I'm not checking the RFP here because that's for the bookmobile request. I'll save request. Okay, then it starts building a grid with my requests. I will add new service requests again. For the bookmobile, I'm going to do first statement, and last statement. So with this particular function, cellular data plan / air card service, there's a red note. That's basically a note to fix locations that it's kind of difficult to prove that cellular data plans are more cost effective than, say, a fiber connection or a cable connection or a satellite connection. Bookmobiles are the loophole, so don't worry about this red text. For the quantity, I'll say we have 1 hotspot on the bookmobile. For the capacities, I usually tell people to give a pretty broad range. We go all the way down to 10 megabits per second, and just in case, put 1 Gbps as the max. I know it's kind of weird to think about cellular speeds like that because we think about 4G, LTE, 5G. Those kind of options are not on the 470. We're kind of having to translate those to megabits per second like you would with your building connection. This will serve 1 entity for the bookmobile. I do want installation activation, and then I must check an RFP document. If I didn't upload an RFP document, the system is not going to let me save this request because that is mandatory for this particular function. And save request. And I close the document I meant to have open, so just a second. I've got some narrative to copy paste into the field. I tried to prep this in advance so I wouldn't have to bore you with typing things out quite slowly. And in the slides, there's a section that talks all about making the narrative, and this example text is included there for you to copy paste. And of course, I have a Bookmobile RFP template if you need one. Now, one trick if you're dealing with the narrative to provide more details about the service, if you click and drag down the lower right corner, you can make the box bigger so you can see all of the text at once. I'm going to go ahead and just add a line of space in between. And in the slides, I do have an example for a transport circuit or a WAN circuit for connections between a building, for two buildings that share the internet. I'm not going to show that example here today, but that is in the slides if you need that. So I've got some boilerplate. I need vendors that have spins. The spin is required for vendors to participate in E-rates. I want to make sure that they've got the current year's annual certification form on file. And I want them to confirm that they can actually, deliver service at the address. So I've got a basic description, quantity 1 for monthly internet at this address. This is the address of the main branch. And then I want download speeds between 100 meg and 1 gig. I also want fees for 5 static IP addresses and estimated taxes and surcharges with a start date on July 1st, 2026. And then just for parity and to make sure that vendors are aware that there's an RFP, I do have a line about the Bookmobile, but I direct them to see the RFP for details. Now, under category 1, if you have a request for internet access or a data transmission service to a building, if it's not the cellular data plan, then you're going to have a question about installment payment plan. This is about amortizing special construction charges over a 1 to 4 year period. And there has not been a Kentucky library that has ever needed this option. So you're just going to answer no on that question. Okay, service request category 2. So I'm going to do 2 examples. I'm going to do an internal connections. I'm going to do a managed services example. There's also a basic maintenance example and some cabling options included as options in the slides. So I'm going to add a service request, and I want to seek bids for wireless access points and the licenses to go with them. So for category 2, you've got 3 statements. The first statement, I seek bids for the equipment needed for broadband connectivity, etc. That matches internal connections. I seek bids for basic maintenance service. That is basic maintenance of internal connections. Or I seek bids for the operation management and monitoring of eligible internal connections. That is managed services. So I'm seeking equipment or licenses. I'm going to choose the first I seek bid statements. It comes up with the correct service type, internal connections, but I do have to complete the dropdown for function. So the function dropdown includes a list of the type of equipment that is needed. So in this case, I'm going to go near the bottom and select wireless access points and necessary software and licenses. Then I get additional fields to complete. In this case, I am going to ask for 2 hotspots with licenses. Do you note at the lower left here, there is this option where you can add another service request for basic maintenance of this particular function. So this would automatically add a basic maintenance option for wireless access points. So generally, if you're requesting internal connections for a particular function, you want to go ahead and add on basic maintenance of internal connections. Not so much for access points, but definitely for firewalls. It's very, very common to have those subscriptions that are going to give you the software updates, the security updates. But for now, I'm just going to take that off. And for manufacturer, this is not an endorsement by KDLA, but the most common request made by Kentucky Libraries is for Meraki access points. So I would choose Meraki or equivalent. It's important that this says or equivalent because for internal connections, you have to allow vendors to submit bids for equivalent equipment. So you can specify a preference for your Meraki access point or your Fortinet firewall or your Cisco switches, whatever the case may be, but vendors are allowed to bid you something different as long as it meets, at least those specifications. In this case, I'm going to answer no, I don't need the vendor to install these access points for me. This RFP does not apply to this request, so I save request. Then I'm going to go ahead and add another service request. This time I choose the last statement for operation management and monitoring. And then you get two options. You can ask for managed internal broadband services for equipment that you currently lease or will be leasing, or you have an option for getting managed internal broadband services for equipment that you currently own or that you're getting ready to buy. If you aren't sure which situation your library is going to be in, you should add two service requests, and for one of them choose the lease option, and for one of them choose the owning the equipment option. In this case, I'm just going to select that I own the equipment. So it comes up with the service type and the function for managed internal broadband services for existing equipment. And I put in the number of entities served. This is just going to be for the main branch. Again, RFP doesn't apply, and save request. And I do want to point out that we do want to provide more details about the actual equipment that we want in the narrative. So sometimes, there are some applicants that will leave narratives blank, which I think is completely bizarre. But this is definitely a situation we're going to have to provide some additional details, or the vendor's not really going to know what you need. Okay, so narrative time. Let me go down to category 2 and grab, well, if I can get it copied, I will grab this, put it over here. So once again, drag down the box, make it bigger. Let's add some space. For category 2, I have a lot of boilerplate for requirements, including if you're going to buy equipment, you want it to be new. It needs to actually be new. It's not remanufactured, refurbished, anything like that. It's not open box. And also, there are certain companies that federal funds can't, or manufacturers, I should say. There's some manufacturers on the no-no list with the FCC because of security concerns, and E-rate funds can't be used to pay for equipment from those manufacturers. So that's also referenced here in this particular FCC order. I'm going to take up this basic maintenance example that is in the slides. So now I've got my boilerplate. The vendor has to have a spin. I'm going to use the E-rate eligible cost as the primary factor. I want all new equipment. And then here I specify that I'm asking for quantity 2 of the Meraki, actually I should probably say MR76 at this point, MR76 outdoor access points or equivalent. You want the or equivalent language in the narrative with some specifications for what I wanted to do. I also want quantity 2 of the cloud controller license for the access points. Without the license, the access points don't work. And do note that this one service request up here for internal connections for the wireless access points, that covers both this hardware and the license that goes with it. And then quantity 1 of monthly managed services for a Fortinet firewall that is already owned by the library, and the library is responsible for handling the licensing for that. So those are just some very basic requests for Cat 2. We save and continue. Technical contact. If all the questions are going to go to me as the main contact, I would say no. If you say yes, you can search for users on behalf of your library system that are in the E-Rate Productivity Center, or you can enter details manually. But for the most part, most libraries end up saying no. Everything goes to the main contact on the Form 470. And then if you need to talk to one of your coworkers about how to respond to vendor questions, as an example, you can turn around and do that. I think it's simpler if we just have one contact listed. It just complicates things when we've got multiple people listed on the form. And then state or local procurement requirements, I'm going to say yes. And we're going to use the model procurement language for this example library, since the majority of Kentucky libraries follow the model procurement code. Then I'll review FCC Form 470. We'll be hanging out for about 30 seconds while the system is generating the draft PDF. And I know I am coming up on time, so hopefully this won't take too long. We might run over a couple minutes because this is the first time I have ever done a webinar that combines Cat 1 and Cat 2 together. So on my tasks list, I reopen the form. You've got an option to download a PDF copy of the draft. So that's really handy if you're working on this yourself and then you want to send the draft to me for review. That's really helpful. Once you have reviewed the draft and everything looks good, you check the box to say that the information in the PDF is correct. And then you want to continue to certification. Technically, you can send a document for certification to another person who has an E-Rate Productivity Center account. But sometimes that sort of gets lost. It gets transferred to somebody else's tasks list. I think it's better if the person who prepares the 470 is also the person who certifies. So I continue to certification, answer yes on the pop-up to proceed. On the last page, you check all of the boxes. No tricks there. You're saying you're eligible and you're agreeing to follow various E-Rate program rules. You certify. On the pop-up, you're answering yes. You understand you can be prosecuted for making false statements on the form, and you're authorized to represent the library. Your form then disappears, but the system still has it, and we want to go get that certified PDF. So I'm going to click on this USAC logo to return to the landing page. Then I will scroll to the very bottom to the section for looking up FCC forms. It's set to look up the 470. Change the funding year drop down to 2026. And you can see I've got a couple different examples I've already done. I'll go ahead and click on the nickname of the form I was just working on. I do want to point out in this application information section here at the top, the allowable contract date is January 8th. So that is the date when the 28 calendar days I'm required to accept bids have elapsed. So January 8th is the first date. I would be able to evaluate bids for the services requested on this 470, finalize the evaluation, sign a contract if needed. So do pay careful attention, but remember that the system is going to send you an automated reminder on that date. But if you have specified a later due date in your narrative field or your RFP, you must abide by that later due date. But for most libraries, what the system calculates as the allowable contract date will be correct. I'm currently on the summary tab of this record, kind of showing everything that's on the form. I go to generated documents, and the original version link is my certified PDF. I'm now going to stop sharing. And I'm going to come back and get into my slides. This will take just a moment because I have to scroll through a lot of slides to get to where I need to pick up. Because again, there's 130 some slides in this deck. way too much, but I wanted to make sure all the examples are there for your later reference. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm still scrolling. I'm in the 60s right now. Okay, oh my goodness. And I know we're right at time. I'm just going to stay over a couple of minutes. Let me jump back in. Okay, so here is an example. This is an example of the allowable contract date email that USAC will send you once you reach, you've passed the 28 calendar days. You'll then complete bid evaluations with E-rate eligible cost as the primary factor. And then there's some notes about spam bids. This is an example of the bid evaluation matrix that USAC sends. This is attached to that email about the allowable contract date. It works as an example. For me, it's not the best example. I have many examples. So depending on what your situation is, I can find you something that's probably going to work well for you. Just making sure that E-rate eligible cost is the primary factor. There's also an example from E-Rate Central. They're a consulting company that makes some E-rate eligible E-rate information publicly available. So they have an example of a bid evaluation matrix. And it's a little fancy. You got to play with it to figure it out. It does have a nice tab for tracking the bids as they come in. And then you can set up different weighting for whichever factors you type into the form. So, some people use it. I know at least one library that uses this. So it's there if you need it, but don't feel like you're obligated to use it. I'm not endorsing this. So don't forget about E-rate document retention. You need to save everything. When we're talking about Form 470 competitive bidding, that's the 470, any RFP documents you used, all bids received. So that's winning bids and losing bids, your bid evaluation, the contract if you signed it, vendor communications, and then the invoice for those services. And you're keeping all of that for at least 10 years after the last date for service in the funding year. So for funding year 2026, we're talking about your internet, for example. The last date for service is June 30th, 2027. That means you've got to keep all the paperwork related to that funding request you're going to make until at least June 30th of 2037. 37. It's very, very long retention. So of course, looking ahead, we're going to be doing the Form 471. That should be released in mid-January. I project around January 15th. You need to complete your competitive bidding process if required, and make sure the contract is fully executed before you file the Form 471. And we will be providing updated training on that in January. I might do separate trainings for Cat 1 and Cat 2 because the 470, it's pretty similar for Cat 1 and Cat 2. The 471 application is kind of different. So I'll probably need to keep separate trainings for those. So wrapping up, I've got links to some resources. They've got new tools on the website. And of course, the USAC Client Service Bureau, or Customer Support Center, I should say, is available to answer questions as well. However, I'm your first line for questions. I kindly request that you come to me first because I'm going to know a lot more about your library's particular situation than some random person you get from USAC. So I can give you more particulars about your situation. They're just going to be quoting boilerplate at you. If you haven't already, signed up for our Kentucky Tech listserv. I sent reminders about E-rate to Kentucky Tech and also the director's listserv. And there's my contact information. You can reach me at lauren.abner@ky.gov. 502-564-1728, or there's a link in the slides for booking an appointment with me. Also, if you have any of my previous emails, whether they've gone through the listserv or it's something I emailed you directly, in the signature, I have a link to my bookings page. So feel free to grab an appointment. All right, so that is it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'll hang out in case you guys have any questions.